What's up, you freaking geniuses? So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to add and subtract rational expressions that have opposite denominators, or flipped denominators, okay? So as you can see, here we have 3x minus 1 in this denominator right here. And here it's flipped, right? It's 1 minus 3x, okay? So in order to add or subtract any type of fractions or rational expressions, you have to have the same denominator, okay? So to make something clear here, here we have 3x minus 1. And here, we can't just flip these, okay? We can't just write it as, flip it and write it as 3x minus 1. Because 1 minus 3x and 3x minus 1 are not the same things. We can't just flip it. Because if you want to just think of it in terms of numbers, 2 minus 5 is not the same thing as 5 minus 2, right? I can't just flip it. Because 2 minus 5, that's equal to negative 3, and 5 minus 2 is equal to positive 3, right? This one's negative, this one's positive. They're not the same thing. So it's the same thing here. We can't just flip it, all right? So what do we have to do here? Well, I will tell you, young Padawan, you need to multiply the top and the bottom by negative 1, okay? You can pick either one of these, but you only have to multiply one of the fractions by negative 1, all right? So let's use this one right here because it looks like it's a little easier to work with than this one. So we're going to multiply the top by negative 1 and the bottom, right? We're multiplying this whole thing right here by negative 1. Okay, so then if we simplify this whole thing, first of all, let's bring this over. So this is going to be 4x minus 1 over 3x minus 1. And then we're adding right here, right? So we're going to have plus our other fraction. So here, x times negative 1, that's equal to negative x. And then here, 1 minus 3x times negative 1, all you have to do is distribute this negative 1. All right, so negative 1 times 1 is equal to negative 1. And then negative 1 times 3x, that's equal to positive 3x, right? So plus 3x. Okay, so now that we have negative 1 plus 3x, now we can actually flip these, right? And again, if you want to just use regular numbers, that's always a good way to do it. So negative 1 plus 3, that's equal to positive 2, right? But what if I flip these? What if I wrote it as 3 plus negative 1? Well, that's still equal to positive 2, okay? So when you add numbers together, you can flip them, right? But when you're just subtracting, like we were before, you can't just flip them, okay? Okay, so now we have 3x minus 1 right here also, okay? So as you can see, we have the same denominator in both cases, right? So in order to add these, well, again, you can just think of normal numbers. So if I had like 1 over 5 plus 2 over 5, well, we have the same denominator, right? So you just keep it, and then the top you just add straight across, right? So 1 plus 2, that's equal to 3, right? So you do the exact same thing over here. So let's just bring it down here, okay? So we have the same denominator in both cases, right? So let's write that down, 3x minus 1. And then on top, you just solve straight across, okay? So we're going to have 4x minus 1 and then plus negative x, right? But whenever you add a negative number, it's the same thing as just subtracting. So really, we just have minus x right there, right? So minus x. Okay, now can we simplify anything? Well, yeah, we can simplify 4x minus x because that's equal to 3x, right? 4x minus x is equal to 3x. And then we still have this minus 1 right there, so 3x minus 1. And then that's going to go over the same thing, right? 3x minus 1. Okay, now you can see we have the same thing on top and the bottom. And again, if you want, you can think of numbers. So if we had something like 5 over 5, well, 5 divided by 5, you have the same thing on top and the bottom. That's equal to 1, right? So here, the exact same thing. Got the same thing on top and the bottom. They basically just cancel out, or they do cancel out, and it's just equal to positive 1, right? So positive 1 would be your answer right here. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too bad. Let's try one last example where we're going to subtract, since it's just a little bit different. All right, so here's our second example. So if you look at the denominators, here we have m squared minus 1, and here we have 1 minus m squared. So again, they're flipped, right? But luckily, we know how to match those up now, okay? So remember, the first thing you want to do is multiply by negative 1 on the top and the bottom, right? So you can pick the first one or the second one. Let's just pick the second one right here. Okay, so we're going to multiply the top by negative 1, and we're going to multiply the bottom by negative 1, okay? So then this is going to simplify to, again, just bringing everything over. That first one is m squared minus 6m over m squared minus 1 minus, and here we can multiply, right? So we have a negative 1 out here, so again, you just distribute it. So negative 1 times 3m is equal to negative 3m, right? So negative 3m, and negative 1 times positive 2 is equal to negative 2. And then that's going to go over the bottom right here. So negative 1 times 1, that's equal to negative 1, right? And then negative 1 times m squared is equal to positive m squared, so plus m squared. Okay, and to be clear, remember here we were subtracting, right? It was 1 minus m squared, so that's why we couldn't just flip it. But now that we multiplied it by negative 1 on the bottom, it basically turned into a plus sign. So now that we have our plus sign, now we can flip these, right? So I'm going to write the m squared first and the negative 1 last. So we're going to have m squared minus 1. Okay, so as you can see, we have the same denominators again, right? M squared minus 1, m squared minus 1. Okay, the only difference here is that we're subtracting instead of adding this time, right? But adding and subtracting fractions works the same way, right? Because if I had something like 3/5 minus 2/5, well, again, I have the same denominators, so you just keep it, and then you just solve straight across. So 3 minus 2 is equal to 1, right? So again, we have the same denominators right here, so we get to keep it. So let's bring everything right here. So it's going to be equal to m squared minus 1, right? That's what we have on the bottom over here. And then just going straight across over here, we're going to have m squared minus 6m, m squared minus 6m. And now this negative sign, this is the only thing that changes. Since we have a negative sign right here, you have to distribute it to the top right here, okay? So when you do that, it changes all the signs, right? So this, when you distribute this minus sign, this negative 3m turns into a positive 3m, and this negative 2 turns into a positive 2, right? And then this minus sign turns into a plus sign also. Okay, so we're going to have plus 3m plus 2 on top, right? Plus 3m plus 2. Okay, so we can keep simplifying this a little bit more. On top, we're going to have m squared. And then here, negative 6m plus 3m, that's equal to negative 3m, right? So minus 3m, and then plus 2 at the end, plus 2. And then at the bottom, we still have the m squared minus 1, okay? So now that we simplified the top and the bottom as much as possible, now we just have to factor the top and the bottom, okay? So first of all, on top, we have a quadratic, right? And we have a leading coefficient of 1. So in order to factor it, we can put two sets of parentheses, and then here we have an m squared, so I know I can have an m here and an m here. And then to figure out the numbers that go right here, you just have to look at your last number right here, which in this case is a positive 2, right? So what two numbers multiply to positive 2, but they also add up to this middle number right here, negative 3? Well, in this case, it would be a negative 2 and a negative 1, right? Negative 2 times negative 1, that's equal to positive 2, and negative 2 plus negative 1 is equal to negative 3, which is the number we're looking for in the middle, right? So these are the two numbers we're going to use, negative 2 and negative 1. So minus 2, minus 1. Okay, so then this is going to be equal to our factors up here, m minus 2, m minus 1. So m minus 2, m minus 1. And now we have to factor the bottom right here. So m squared minus 1. So if you notice, this is actually a difference of squares. Okay, if you don't know how to factor a difference of squares, I'll link a video to that in the card above. But basically, all you have to do is take the square root of each of your terms right here. Okay, so since this is a squared term and 1 squared, 1 is technically a squared term, right? Because 1 is the same thing as 1 squared. All you have to do is take the square root of each of these. So if you take the square root of m squared, you're just going to get m. And if you take the square root of 1 squared, you just get 1, right? So then you get m and 1. So then to factor this, it would just be m plus 1 times m minus 1. Okay, so now that we've factored the top and the bottom as much as possible, now we can start canceling stuff out, okay? So as you can see, on top we have an m minus 1 in parentheses, and on the bottom we have the same thing, right? So those kill each other, okay? Now, what are we left with here? Well, all we're left with is m minus 2 on top, and we're left with m plus 1 on the bottom. Okay, so that's all we're left with, so that would be your final answer. So if you found the video helpful, definitely leave a thumbs up down below. And if you have any other questions or want to see any other examples, just let me know in the comment section below. Also, there's a couple playlists attached that I think you'll find helpful, so definitely check those out, and I'll see you there.